Honourable Ministers, esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 2022 Annual Meetings Human Capital Ministerial Enclave panel discussion, which is focusing on protecting and strengthening human capital amidst a global food crisis. I'm Shakuntala Santharan, and I will be your moderator this afternoon. The Human Capital Ministerial Conclave is a closed-door session with ministers of finance, planning, and budget from countries that belong to the Human Capital Project Network. The Human Capital Project is a global effort to invest in people and for greater equity and economic growth. And as we saw in that video just now, the network has now grown to 86 countries. This event is part 2 of the conclave, and it is designed to share with a wider audience the key takeaways from the closed-door session, which ended just a short while ago. If I could now invite our panel to join me up on stage. Please give them a warm welcome. So right at the end, please. Thank you, Minister. Thank you all. Our distinguished panelists today include Mamta Murthy, who is the Vice President for Human Development at the World Bank. She oversees the global practices for education, health, nutrition, and population, gender, social protection, and jobs, as well as the Human Capital Project. And Her Excellency Oulimata Sarr, who is Minister of Economy, Planning, and Cooperation of Senegal. She's also the first chair of the Human Capital Project Network, a position that I understand will rotate every year among the countries in the network. We also have with us today Mr. Josh Tetrick, who is the CEO and co-founder of Eat Just, which is a food technology company with a mission to build a healthier, safer, and more sustainable food system where everyone eats well. He's particularly interested in his work on the ground in Africa, which has made him acutely aware of the micronutrient deficiencies that people face, and that there is a need for more local solutions. And we have with us as well Mari Pangestu, who is the Managing Director of Development Policy and Partnerships at the World Bank. She provides leadership and oversees the research and data group of the World Bank, the work program of the World Bank's global practice groups, and the external and corporate relations function. Thank you all very much for being with us today. So supporting and protecting human capital is increasingly crucial with the pandemic, with war, with climate change, and increasing poverty. We have rising food prices around the world, and that are affecting the poor the most, and they are also eroding human capital outcomes. And we have rising food and nutrition insecurity. Governments need to offer immediate support to poor households and to innovate to build sustainable, nutritious, and affordable food systems. So, Mamta, please share with us first what happened in the closed session, and what did you take away from what the ministers were sharing with you about their challenges and experiences in dealing with this crisis?
Thank you so much, Shaks. It's great to be here. We haven't had an open door session, if you like, of the Human Capital Project Conclave before. So this is our inaugural open session, and I'm just delighted that we can do this. We created the Human Capital Project so that ministers of finance and budget and planning could talk to each other about the issues they face in providing public resources, as well as the policies that they need to support for human capital development. We were always told the conversations that happen within the conclave are so good, they need to be shared more widely. And that's why we kind of invented this, and I'm really delighted that we can do this. So now to come to your question, what did we discuss? Our discussion really was on two different strands. The first was a focus on social protection systems. These are cash transfer programs that can support households, especially the poor and vulnerable. They are targeted at the poor and vulnerable. And this allows them to purchase food and to keep their children in school and to utilize health services and all the things that require resources, but where households can be constrained because of economic circumstances. Ministers shared how they were expanding cash transfer programs within the fiscal constraints that they have. Many of them shared that it was a lot easier to do this during a crisis if they had built the foundations before the crisis. And typically this means having some kind of social registry, a list of people who you can then target, and also target with cash benefits, and also having means of payment. And nowadays you have technology that can help you in that. Sometimes it's an electronic transfer of cash. Sometimes it's just topping up their mobile accounts and so the technology has opened up the scope for doing much more. Some ministers talked about the crisis being an opportunity for innovation, that there were groups that they hadn't thought of targeting previously, but needed support, and they were able to take advantage of the crisis to do that. And so that was the focus of that strand of the discussion. Now, of course, you can have money to purchase food, but if there is no local availability of good and nutritious food, then that doesn't really help with nutrition security. So the second strand focused on that availability of local nutritious food. There was a good discussion, actually started by Minister Sarr, on some of the prerequisites for local production of nutritious foods. And we also learned from some ministers about the interventions that are needed to help mothers and families and communities actually take advantage of local foods and provide good nutrition to their children. So a very exciting discussion, I may say, bringing together policies from across many different dimensions, because at the end of the day, supporting human capital is about a whole of government approach. It isn't really one ministry that can take responsibility. It has to be a collective government effort, also involving civil society organizations and the private sector.
Thank you, Mamta. And Minister Sarr, as chair of the Human Capital Project Network, and from your experience, how can this food and nutrition crisis affect human capital and the future growth potential of countries? How is Senegal tackling this crisis?
Thank you for giving me the floor. I thank, first of all, the World Bank for inviting me to chair this very important network that is trying to share experiences, lessons learned, to create a community around this very important topic. Most of the countries that are part of the network have human capital as a pillar of their national development plan. Everybody is fully aware that in order to reach the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goal, we will need to address the issues of food, zero hunger, education, and health for all. In my country, social protection is at the center of public policy, whether it's through a vulnerable person registry that we call our national registry, allowing cash transfers to the vulnerable, but also having what we call health coverage for the most vulnerable. Social protection is part of the, I would say, the branding or the flagship programs of the government. What will success look like? I think today, when we looked at the multiple crises that the world is facing, the issue of nutrition is critical. We know in Africa, we know in Senegal, that if you want children to learn, you will have to ensure that they eat properly. I know in the discussion we will talk about solutions, and I will be able to share what Senegal is doing in terms of feeding programs for young children. The second thing that we've learned through the process is that if children and women, youth overall, that are not eating properly, that are subjected to hunger, are not able to be productive. And today, all governments, including our own, is investing in making sure that you tackle that issue of food and nutrition. Earlier during the conclave, we shared our integrated approach as a country, addressing issues of policy, of skills, of financing, of access to market, and of basic infrastructure, because we believe that in order to move the needle, we need an integrated approach. Very, very important. I would like to maybe touch upon the Sahel, because the Sahel is made of countries that are the epicenter of climate change, violent extremism, and currently even coups. And all those crises, those shocks, are affecting the people and their access to nutrition. You have humanitarian action with people who are displaced. And in order to bring the solution to that, we need to invest. So today, I think during the conclave, everybody agreed that it's time also for a call to action. Because everybody is saying it's important, everybody is saying we are dedicating resources to it, but all of us agreed that in order to bring change, we need to leapfrog. And to leapfrog, we don't want to wait for incremental change. We will need major investments in social services, on nutrition, on health, and on education. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. And Josh, we've heard Mamta and Minister Sarr tell us about some of the challenges that countries are facing. Your company is developing ways to develop new plant-based protein and cell-cultured meat. Please tell us what you think, how you think countries should be thinking about finding solutions to this crisis. In particular, your experience in Liberia with manufacturing power gari, which is a fortified cassava porridge, and that was based on traditional gari.
I always hear cell-cultured meat, and I wonder how many folks in the audience know what that is. No need to raise your hand. I'll explain it to you. I think where I come from is that when you step out and you look at the planet today, we don't have a stable, secure food system, a stable, secure food supply. And there are a lot of reasons for that. I'm going to focus on one. About a third of the world today, a third of the world's habitable land is dedicated to one single activity. And it's dedicated to planting soy and corn primarily to feed the animals we eat. I'll say it again. A third of the habitable land dedicated to planting soy and corn to feed the animals we eat. We feed more soy and corn to the animals we eat than we do food generally to the billion people who are going to bed hungry tonight. I think if we step back sort of outside the habit, outside the system we currently live in, it's hard to think about that and come to the conclusion that it makes sense, right? The problem with feeding all those animals, all that feed and all that land is when climate change continues to accelerate, soy and corn prices go way up. They're very susceptible to drought. Food prices go way up. Even the United States today, egg prices are about $4 a dozen, higher than they've ever been. And we need to think about a different way of designing a food system that works for us, that works for folks who are struggling, that works for the climate. And I don't think in that future world we should be using so much land and water to feed the animals. We should make it in a different way. So let me talk about cell culture meat. It's going to sound a little weird, so bear with me. Cell culture meat or cultivated meat is a way of making meat without all that. Instead of starting with live animals and all the land, it starts with a cell. So you can get a cell from a cell bank or a biopsy of an animal or a fresh piece of meat or even an egg. And then you identify nutrients to feed that cell. And then you actually make it in something that kind of looks like how you would brew beer. So you can make real meat. This is not plant-based meat now, which I'm a big supporter of, but you can actually make real meat in a way that uses 70, 80% less land, water, carbon emissions. And if you're in the audience and thinking, man, that sounds a little bit weird, I will remind you that almost every new thing that just came out, people thought were weird in the beginning. And then it gets ubiquitous and boring, and then people don't talk about it anymore. So I think technologies like this isn't the only one, are a way to think in a bolder, more dynamic way of creating a stable, secure, healthier food system. One that I think will have deep impacts in places that I used to work in West Africa, in South Africa and Kenya, but also here too.
What about that initiative? I'd love to know more about cell-cultured meat, but please tell us about that initiative in Liberia, PowerGari. What did you learn from that?
Yeah. Well, when I was working in Liberia, sometimes folks don't draw a distinction between sort of extreme malnourishment and micronutrient deficiency. And I noticed a lot of micronutrient deficiency in particular in Liberia and South Africa. And one thing my company is skilled at doing is thinking about how to combine different kinds of food together and create something that is different, hopefully a little bit better than what currently exists. So we created a product called PowerGari, which is a micronutrient-rich porridge with cassava as the base. And we worked with folks on the ground in Liberia to both grow the cassava and distribute the product. There wasn't sort of any breakthrough technology in it. It was just us thinking about what a smart, thoughtful way of going after a problem was through the business model of being a company.
But how is it different from traditional gari, PowerGari?
It comes in a package, looks a lot cooler, is infused with micronutrients, has some other flavors and whatnot, and it's really from a nutritional perspective, if you put a whole lot of micronutrients in traditional gari and maybe some flavoring, it'd be PowerGari.
So PowerGari is a complete meal then?
That's right. That's right.
Okay. Fascinating stuff, Josh. And Mari, see what we can do with science and technology and innovation. So some countries, developing countries in particular, have the added challenge of securing financing. Mari, what can multilateral institutions like the World Bank do to help countries secure financing and also develop partnerships to deal with this crisis on a more global level?
Yeah, thanks for your question, and I just want to join Mamta by, being very happy and excited to be here as the open part of the Human Capital Conclave. When you think about conclave, you think about the papal conclave, right? And all you see at the end is the white smoke. So what we're trying to do here is to share the white smoke, what went in the room, which was very exciting and really very interesting. And with so many new members, it's about peer learning, it's about listening to each other and figuring out that, you have similar challenges. And also hearing that I think some solutions, even I learned in the room of different solutions to what we're facing. To your question regarding the role of the World Bank and financing in addressing this crisis, if you like, and the impact it has on human capital, I think we need to be realistic and innovative, given the resource constraints that countries are facing in dealing with multiple crises, right? It's the food crisis, it's the pandemic, don't forget the after effects of the pandemic is still with us, and then the impact of conflict and war and so on. Because we also heard in the conclave how countries have to also deal with migrants, refugees who have migrated because of climate change or conflict. So they're not only do they have to feed their own population, but also the refugees that come across border. So I think the challenge is great, and therefore we need to be practical, innovative, and do it together in partnerships. So what the bank has done is really lean forward and has done surge financing for the next 15 months as we have designed a crisis response to the tune of 170 billion, out of which 30 billion is for food to respond to the food crisis. So we are working with many of the countries that are in the conclave to support the programs that are being designed there. And IFC has a $6 billion food security platform. So I don't know whether Josh, ideas like Josh could also come in there, because I'm thinking practical solutions. You mentioned the, what is it, Power Gauri Courage.
Yeah.
You know, when I was Minister of Trade, we actually did something very simple, didn't require high technology. We were distributing cooking oil, but at subsidized cost because of the high price. But we put the vitamin A in the cooking oil, yeah? And you can think of practical solutions like, you know, in the food, making sure that people have food. This is the first line of response. We heard that from all the countries in the room today. You have cash transfers, and in some cases you want to also distribute food, not cash, right? And this, we you know, the surveys, the household surveys we did during the COVID pandemic showed that actually when the income falls, women ate less, yeah? So you want to be able to make sure women eat, right? And are well fed. So you might have to do food distribution directly rather than cash, right? Because what they do is they feed their husbands and children and their family first before they feed themselves. And then children, right? Children are also lacking in nutrition. And you can think of simple, low-cost solution and combine it with a food feeding program. Something very simple in my country, it would be like green bean porridge, which is very simple but very low cost, and they can actually grow it in their own garden, and it's nutritious, right? So I'm just giving you examples of, I think before we go to the financing and the high technology, with the financing you have and the policies you have, this is what needs to be done. Finally, on partnerships. We have many partnerships with the countries themselves, of course. And I think today somebody made the point about the importance of working with communities. Yeah, and I really believe that, you know. So partners are the government, the local government, the communities, and then all the other donor communities to co-finance and come together to reach the scale of the programs that you need to have on the ground, and the private sector. I think we didn't talk too much today about the private sector, but I do think the private sector is another important partner. I mean, I can go through the list of partners partnerships on food security that is happening right now, but I think, you know, we are in G7, G20, they're all having this global partnership on food security with the intention of coordination. And just want to mention World Food Program, because I met somebody just then from the World Food Program, because we work very closely on the ground for the humanitarian side, but then after the humanitarian side, you do need to pivot to the longer term issue of building out food, you know, what do you call it, sustainable, nutritious food systems, because you don't want to repeat another food crisis. In one of the partnerships, which is a G20 partnerships, I'm going to forget the acronym here, Global Agriculture, Food and Security Partnership, which was created out of the 2008 food crisis. It was sort of, the discussion was, hey, we knew all this, you know, the emergency response, need longer term response. How come we have another food crisis? Because we didn't do what we were supposed to do after the last food crisis. So how can we not repeat that same mistake? And how can we really have the partnerships focus, actually this one focuses on the farmers and making sure that the production side and the value chain is addressed. So I think, let me stop here. We can talk more, but maybe that's enough for you.
No, fantastic stuff there, Mari, and really vital points that you raised, and such great examples of simple solutions that are available. as you mentioned children, and a food crisis is also a nutrition crisis, and there is clear evidence that children actually suffer from long-term consequences, even with short-term shocks to their nutrition, even in utero. And at the same time, we've got this obesity crisis looming, with more people resorting to eating poor quality food in crisis. Mamta, first, can you elaborate more on the long-term effects that this food and nutrition crisis will have on human capital today and also for future generations? And why is this so important? Is this something that should be keeping us up at night?
So, Shaks, yes, this is something that should be keeping us up at night. And here's why. Human capital is cumulative. It builds up from the little fetus till, child being born and then growing up. And if there's a setback at one stage, it's not like there's an automatic bounce back. It means that the setback is prolonged and can play out over the course of one's whole life. I think this is something that people don't understand. If a child is undernourished in the womb, that child has a much lower chance of completing school, of getting a job, of being a productive individual. It always surprises me that this is not understood. Let's take school closures that have happened because of COVID. You hear people say, well, so what? The kid missed a year of school. They'll be okay, right? They just need an additional year of school later on, and then they'll be able to make it up. But just put your mind to a kid who should have been in second grade when COVID happened. She's out of school for maybe a year. That school closures were 1 year on average. She comes back to school. It would be good if she came back to school. And she's now in 4th grade, right? She missed all of 3rd grade. She's in 4th grade, but she's not ready to read the textbook, the 4th grade textbook. She's not ready to do math at 4th grade level. And the assumption is that just because she's back in school and schooling is happening, it's all recovered. The learning is recovered. But she's not ready for those books, and so chances are that she'll fall behind. She might even drop out of school. By the way, she may have even forgotten what she learned in 2nd grade. Oh. So this is why it's very important to take this issue of setbacks to human capital seriously, because if no effort is made to help her get to 4th grade, she's going to cumulatively fall further and further behind. So unlike kids whose schools weren't closed, she's never going to quite have the same quality of her learning as other kids. The situation of very young children is even more serious. We often talk about the first 1,000 days being the golden period, the golden days, when you have to get things right. And actually today the minister from Bhutan made a reference to how they are they call the first 1,000 days, the first 3 years, the golden period, and they're trying to really emphasize
of a child's life.
Of a child's life, yes. They're really trying to emphasize the getting all the support that parents need for the first 1,000 days of a child's life. Well, here's what happens if you are if you're not cognitively stimulated, right? And parents don't talk to you in a way that encourages you to learn language at a young age, or you don't have exposure to books, or you're undernourished, right? You simply don't get enough to eat, or you don't get the right things to eat. Chances are that you won't be ready to go to school and learn to read in school. Chances are that you won't be able to make, progress in school. So it is such a serious thing that we need to get it right. And one of the things that really worried us during COVID was that most early childhood education, most kindergartens, most nurseries were shut. And that meant there was little or no cognitive stimulation. And many kids get their nutrition from, or get a meal, a very important meal from their early childhood center. And that didn't happen either. So I think it's very important for people to understand that human capital is cumulative, and unlike income, it just doesn't bounce back. You have to have concerted efforts to make it bounce back, and the early years, the very early years, the first 1,000 days of life are incredibly important.
Thank you, Mamta. And Senegal, Minister Sarr, takes early childhood development very seriously. You talked a little bit about this earlier. It's invested in child nutrition and early stimulation programs. Can you give us some examples of some of these investments, especially in underserved areas of your country?
Absolutely. Senegal has a holistic approach to child nutrition. And it's really anchored on 3 legs. One that is community-based, and the community-based approach is that who drives this nutrition program in the community, and in Senegal is the women. How do you bring together the women to ensure that children are fed well and are using nutritious foods? That's one. The second thing that Senegal is doing is a very successful school feeding program. We call it des cantines scolaires. Those school feeding programs have 2 purposes. One is to keep the children in school for the longest time. And the second is to make sure that the nutrition level is good. The World Food Programme, UNICEF, and the government puts the funding together to have a school feeding program. And the school feeding program is also an opportunity to give the farmers revenue. Because of course, the food that is used for the school feeding program is procured and sourced locally, creating a viable ecosystem where people, feel involved in the program. So that's number 2. The third innovation with Senegal is that Senegal included our superfoods in the nutrition program. As you know, today the world is looking for baobab. Most of the runners, you probably heard of moringa, and you probably heard as well of fonio. So having those indigenous plants, those superfoods that are very nutritious, that the world is buying from us, and adding them to the meals of children and of communities is something that Senegal is doing. Senegal has, for instance, in what we call your private garden, they're pushing the communities to grow moringa, because as you know, moringa is full of micronutrients, it's full of vitamin C, it has more vitamin C than an orange, and having it grown locally means that, children and women can add it to the food. To conclude, I will say that it's very important. If you want to have a successful nutrition program, it has to be community-led. It has to have an anchor on economic empowerment, so it can be sustainable. You have to ensure that you bring a coalition of actors together in it, development actors, NGOs, working closely with communities. And really, the message I think the global food crisis is pushing us to is that make sure that you use your indigenous products. We have, all the wisdom in all of our countries that we can tap into to be able to bring nutrition back in our systems.
Thank you, Minister. And Mari, how do you think countries can prioritize building and maintaining a human capital amid this crisis? And we've been hearing about partnerships. You talked about partnerships earlier. How can the World Bank support countries in protecting and strengthening human capital now in the crisis and also longer term?
Yeah, I think just to say upfront that the World Bank group, because we have IFC as well, we stand ready to step up and provide the support that countries need, whether it's for the short-term emergency need or for the longer-term resilience that needs to be built up. And I think Mamta provided some of the, what do we do with the financing? We don't just come with the financing. We come with the knowledge, the data, and the analytics. What is the most effective use of these resources? How do you design the best emergency response program. And cash transfers does come out as the easiest way to deliver on food emergency needs. But it needs to be well targeted. And then there was a whole discussion about data, right? The importance of data. Who are we targeting? And digital ID systems and digital technology to be able to know who are you targeting and to monitor whether what you're doing is effective or not. And it can also then differentiate from different vulnerable groups, whether it's women, whether it's children, or whether it's people with disabilities, or those who are not registered, like migrants and refugees. How do you reach them? So I think that's kind of the first type of the emergency response. And I think there was also a word of caution coming from our president today regarding cautioning the use of blanket subsidies for the whole population, providing low-cost food for everyone in your population. If you had to do it for political reasons or for just dire emergency, it should be very temporary and time-bound, and you have a phase-out. And then when you phase it out, you should go back to a targeted, more targeted program between cash transfer as well as direct food support. And I think these are some of the lessons. Part of the conclave is about learning from each other and sharing lessons, and we also share lessons from past food crisis, because the World Bank has gone through this, especially in 2008. We really went through this. And then second, what do we do in the medium term? Even as we are addressing the short term, how do you address the resilience for the medium term, especially for protecting human capital? I think Mamta mentioned a few, they call it, inclusive productive programs. So it's not just cash transfers, but providing skills, providing seed capital, and there was an interesting discussion there. When do you stop cash transfers and get them to graduate so that they can be more productive, right? You can have cash for work program, you can have cash support for sufficient enough time until they can have the skills as well as be more productive with seed capital, become entrepreneurs, so that they can get out of the cash transfer program. But there was, I think, very interesting finding also from Kuwait. I think our friend from Kuwait, he was sitting here just now, he's gone. He said they found that it's not just financing and skills, but the socio-emotional skills part was important. The need for people at the bottom, when you're really just in a dire situation, you have no confidence to want to get out of it, and the self-esteem, the confidence issue, and for women especially, also very risk-averse behavior. So these are, I think, interesting. I thought that was a very, that I learned about that, it was eye-opening for me. And then when you talk about the food production side of it, there was lots of good ideas already coming out, but really we do have to focus on making sure we increase productivity, because at the end of the day, you want to address the drivers of food insecurity, and there's a whole list there about production, using fertilizers more efficiently, and addressing climate change, and the agriculture subsidies that countries undertake. We had in another session we were talking about repurposing agriculture subsidies, because the current one is actually not really increasing productivity, and also actually it contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. So how can you repurpose that agriculture subsidy for things like growing local food, or having using technology and making sure you are using sustainable and climate smart production technologies, and so on and so forth. So there's a whole our ag teams are working very much with countries to identify what they can do to really address the food insecurity, the drivers of food insecurity, especially in Africa. I think what keeps on coming out from this food crisis story over and over again, how dependent Africa is on imported food, whereas we just heard from Senegal that actually there is a lot of local potential for local production, whether it's the local foods or even the other normal crops. There must be ways to address these issues now. We talked about this, by the way. I went through the 2008 food crisis. We had all this conversation today, last time in 2008, and you know, there was a lot of attention for a few years, and then things fell off the wagon. And now you have an added seriousness of the climate crisis, as well as, you know, all the fragility and the conflict on top of that. So it's an even more bigger call. So, you know, we stand ready really to do all this with the countries, and also globally with other partners. Yeah.
On that note, how important is the private sector before we come back to you, Josh? How important is the private
very
sector?
important, very important, because what we're looking at in terms of building out a resilient food production system is the whole value chain. And that's the private sector is very much embedded within that, you know. So it's farm to table, right? And how do you actually have that overall effectiveness, efficiency in the overall value chain of the food system. I think that's definitely private sector. You know, like in this whole fertilizer issue, that's all private sector that needs to come in. And I think on innovation and technology, that's also private sector. You know, I learned a new term from our ag folks. It's called precision agriculture. It's knowing exactly what type of fertilizer and other nutrients for this particular plant and how much, and you can use technology to know so that you're not wasting. Somebody talking about wasting, I think food waste came out also as an issue. And myself, as a trade minister at the time, we actually calculated how much food was being wasted just in the transportation, for instance. So I think these are issues that definitely the private sector. So just to close again on IFC, IFC has this $6 billion food security platform, which is intended to work together with the private sector.
So you talked about innovation and technology, and Josh, that's something that your company...
That was a cue for him.
Right, it is very focused on what should countries be doing to encourage more innovation, and what kind of skills should they be investing in?
Well, I do think sometimes it feels like there's presented a false choice. We're not doing it up here, but a false choice between innovation, technology, and basic solutions, right? So what is the answer? Is it basic stuff? Is it soil health? Is it oil with micronutrient, with vitamin A? Or is it some breakthrough technologies? And it doesn't have to be binary, right? It should be both. Just like with renewable energy and thinking about decarbonizing our economy, we should have more walkable streets. We should have folks riding more bikes. We should have solar power. We can have all of it, right? It doesn't have to be this false choice. And I think that way about this. So what are some basic, straightforward solutions? I love the idea of oil with vitamin A, right? You don't need hundreds of millions of dollars in VC funding to come. That's very basic. It makes a lot of sense. I think PowerGaria is like that. Something that we do that's an example, a bit of what the minister said about these superfoods. For me, the mung bean is a superfood. So we found in our company that in the mung bean, which has been cultivated for about 4,000 years, there's a storage protein in the mung bean that when you remove it, scrambles like an egg. So today, we've built a network of thousands of farmers in Thailand, and we've also sourced from East Africa, from Tanzania, and from Mozambique, mung beans that we then mill into a flour, and then we remove the protein through a protein separation process. And at Peet's Coffee, and at Gregory's Coffee, and at Whole Foods, and lots of other places in DC, you can buy a product made with that mung bean from the farmers in Thailand, from the farmers in East Africa. So I do think there's a really interesting, what are all the crops, right? And all these emerging economies, what are all the crops across sub-Saharan Africa that are more than we even thought, because we haven't thought about how to apply different approaches to them. I think that's really exciting. And what can countries do to help cultivate it? I think probably step number one is just realizing that technology in food has a role to play, and bringing people on your team that have some experience in that and can put some intention behind it. I think second would be thinking about, and we were talking earlier, Singapore has actually done quite a bit on this, thinking about how to create a whole ecosystem around this, university curriculum, incentives related to land, corporate tax, incentives related to if you employ X number of people, you get X amount. And I think governments also allocating their own capital to fund entrepreneurs who have ideas, many of which will fail, right? You know, maybe it's the case there's another crop in Senegal that might not be widely cultivated today, but there's an entrepreneur in Senegal who has an idea of removing the protein from it and selling it all across the world as a way to generate revenue for local economy. And it's hard to build a company, and these ideas might fail, but creating an environment where you're providing funding and comfortable with the idea, not every single one is going to work. So those are a few ideas.
Thank you, Josh. And before we conclude our really interesting and, you know, so many fascinating points and useful information from our discussion, I'd like to ask you for your last reflections, thoughts, takeaways from the conclave and on these issues that face us. Mamta, well, actually, let's start with Mari. Yes, Mari.
I think what I really valued about this conclave was really the learning from each other. And I think we all identified the importance of data and how to use data better. And those two were very outstanding to me. You know, if you want to do all the things we wanted to do, we need to have that process really be embedded. And I really think it's a great group of ministers who have hopefully learned from each other and continue. It's a network also, so that, you know, one minister could reach out to another minister. Hey, what did you do when you were faced with this, right? And I myself, being a former policymaker, I think that is really, it's partly peer pressure, but on the other hand, it's also comforting, yeah, to have this network of ministers who are facing similar challenges, who can then share experiences.
Thank you. And Josh, your thoughts?
I think this crisis that we find ourselves in is an opportunity to force the spring and be a bit bolder. And sometimes we need that to clear the cobwebs and think clearly. And I think the more we can ask the question of what does it look like if we start over? What does it look like if we design a food system that really works for everyone? Sometimes that can get us out of our current habit, some elements of maybe a current infrastructure that maybe made sense 40 years ago, but doesn't always make the most sense today. And there are a lot of ideas that flow from that, not just the couple that I mentioned. And I think the more that investors and folks in government and other institutions can use this moment as an opportunity to think about a more transformational redesign, I think the better off we'll be.
Minister Sarr?
We had a very interesting week, so my call for action will be beyond the conversation we just had. I think most of the countries that attended several events today have a few messages for the World Bank, the Bretton Woods institutions. I think all the countries agreed on scale, so we want to see more. Everybody agreed on fast track. Everybody agreed on business unusual in terms of processes. And lastly, everybody agreed on equitable. I think today the wealth of knowledge that was shared between countries showed that there are solutions. And I think if we want to be successful, we will need to scale it up. So it would not be just a pilot in Senegal or just a pilot in another country, but how do we move all of us together? I started my statement earlier today with talking about the Sustainable Development Goals. For those of you who don't know, in 2015, the world agreed on an agenda to reach a certain number of goals, 17 by 2030. We are just a few years away from those goals, and we are still in multiple shocks right now that are holding us back. And in order to do that big jump for all the countries, particularly the underdeveloped ones, we need significant investment, we need patient capital, we need funding, and that's our call for action.
Mamta, your final closing reflections for us, please.
So three closing reflections from my side. First, I agree with what with my fellow panelists have said. That's my first reflection. My second is that I think we should recognize that children have been the real casualty of COVID-19 and are now the casualty of a food crisis. When COVID-19 started, I think there was everybody felt there are going to be terrible deaths, and everybody realized the elderly are vulnerable. And there were massive shutdowns, lockdowns, and actually schools were closed for the longest period. Early childhood centers were closed for the longest period. And that has been a huge setback to a generation of children. And they are the, sort of, if you like, the unintended casualty of COVID-19 has been this generation of children, suffering both mal and undernutrition and loss of learning because they didn't go to school. So I think we need to wake up to that. That is the big challenge that we have to face. That's my second reflection. And my third reflection is that I think everybody's realized that COVID-19 has been very unequal in its impact. It's the poor children. It's the poor families that didn't get access to healthcare. It's the fact that now people are struggling to get back into the job market, and typically it's the ones who are at the bottom end of the distribution. I think there's a huge demand for more equality as we come out of COVID, and as is the World Bank, I think that's something we have to take on board, and as Minister Sarr was saying, and that's why there are people who are protesting, right? So that would be my third reflection. We have to take this business of equality, both equality in this generation and intergenerational equality. That's where the children and addressing their needs comes in. Thanks.
Thank you all so very much. So many valuable and vital insights. A lot of food for thought here that we hope will,
no pun intended,
translate into action. And we're hoping that more people, more countries will join the Human Capital Network, the Human Capital Project Network, and help more people achieve their full potential. Again, thank you very much to our panelists, and thank you everyone for joining us today.